Hello, I'm Linda Seith from The Layered Onion. Thank you for joining us. We will be listening to our amazing creators talk about their art and mental health. 48 million artists all over the world share this lived experience. The Layered Onion was formed to create a supportive community, allowing the creators to focus on their art, bringing their work from the shadows to receive the recognition and opportunities they deserve. Each podcast will feature an artist who talks about their creations and mental wellness. Art is healing. We hope these discussions will inspire you to appreciate the stories behind the creations and, more importantly, inspire your inner creator. Together, we can tackle the stigma surrounding mental health.
All right. Mert, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So maybe you could tell me where you're located and what is your type of art?
Sure. I am out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I have lived here all my life. So I'm very comfortable with my surroundings. And also I picked up a camera when I was about 21. And that was it. I just had to do photography no matter where or how, or I just knew I had to do it. That was what I needed to do for my life. So I went to art school and I learned so many things. I'm not really a drawer, but I always enjoyed painting. So about 2018, I found a process that I had not experimented with called cyanotype. And it's a historic photo process discovered in 1842. So when I started doing it, I felt almost like a real artist because I was using a paintbrush and I was applying this chemistry to paper by hand. And it got me out of my little box frame that I always am in with my camera. So I felt a lot of freedom in that process. And it's become definitely my favorite process of all time. So I'm pretty stuck on it for a while. We'll see how long. I've done other processes along the way, and I continue to do photography as in straight photography from the camera. It's just something about doing this historical process and getting in touch with, it's very cathartic for me. So I paint this chemistry on a paper. It's I use a lot of motion in my body when I do it, doing large scale and small scale as well. It's the movement of the brush on the paper. And that's so much different than looking into a camera and making a photograph. So I think it took me a long time to call myself a photographer, even longer to call myself an artist. But I feel like an artist 100% now.
So maybe you could explain cyanotype a little bit more in detail.
Sure. So it is two chemicals put together, usually on watercolor paper. And when they dry, they become sensitive to sunlight, to UV light. So just like a darkroom paper. So I've painted this chemistry on. I can create a digital negative. I can create a negative, and I can put that on the paper and put it in sunlight, or I can use a UV light. And the final product is a very blue and white image. In fact, they used it for blueprints up until the mid-19th century, or excuse me, mid-20th century. So when you think about blueprints, you see the blue and white, and that's exactly what cyanotype is. It's blue and white. You can also tone them. So I haven't played much with that, but you can tone them in plum juice and citric acid, and it will change the color of your print from that blue and white to something else. But it's a fun historical process. It's the most eco-friendly of any photography process, probably including digital, because, we have, once these cameras die, we've got this extra bit of trash, right? So this can be dumped. When I rinse it, I've rinsed it in rivers before. and it doesn't affect the environment. So that's really a nice part of the process as well.
So in this recent edition of the shallot, you have a cyanotype that's in it. It's called Magnolia. Maybe you could kind of tell us what was the base photograph and just tell us more about what's in the shallot.
Sure. So Magnolia, I did a series of 50 images using plants native to my area. So magnolias, I pulled some off they were actually on the ground. I pulled them off the ground, flattened them. And for that process, instead of making a negative, I actually used the plant material as the subject to separate the paper from the sunlight. So I painted my chemistry on wet. I added my magnolia leaves. I added things like salt and vinegar, and sometimes I would add bubbles from dishwashing soap. Just kind of my kitchen. I go through my kitchen and pull things and use them for these prints. So this is interesting and different because it's not a negative on a piece of paper. It is the actual plant material. And those I put in the sun for about 6 to 8 hours. And then I let them sit in my cabinet for another 5 days before I rinse them and wash them. And it creates such an interesting dynamic for the use of this old historical process.
Well, the photography offers such complexities. And now that I hear all the different materials that you used, maybe that makes more sense to me, because when I was really looking at it, I was trying to figure out about the bubbles and all the different things. What do you just experiment with many things? You said vinegar, soap.
Salt.
Salt, yeah.
So it is anything to disturb the chemistry from drying on the paper and also act as a barrier between the paper chemistry and the sun. So anytime you disturb that, you create a different look. And it is definitely experimental. I never know exactly what it's going to look like. When I look in my camera and I have a project that I'm working on with my straight photography, I'll call it, I usually have an idea in my head of what I want it to look like. And it goes from my brain to my hand to my camera and to my computer. I can see it beforehand. These are completely different because they are so experimental, and I have literally no idea what it's going to turn out like, depending on how, like, I use an eyedropper to drop the vinegar onto the paper. So it's like dropping and then it's kind of moving at will. So it's fun. It's almost like opening a little Christmas present every time, or opening a little gift every time you rinse it and let it dry, because you're not quite sure what's going to happen.
So I want to talk about series, because you tend to do these projects in series. What makes you decide how large the series is going to be? Why do you take the series approach? Maybe you could talk about that a bit.
Sure. I like things in multiples. I always have. So, and I like things in squares generally. So multiples of squares is kind of my ideal aesthetic. And it's really a freedom. I can do as many or as little as I want, but I like this, almost the scientific approach of having multiples side by side that you can kind of view together and look at similarities and differences.
So when you have a series, what do you hope to leave with the viewer?
I would hope that they're interested in the process, no matter what it is. I would hope that they're engaged by what they're seeing, that they might have questions that I could answer. It's fun to make artwork that people can't look at right away and say, oh, well, that's a black white photo that was made in darkroom. It's interesting to make these things that people are going, now, what did you do? What kind of additives did you use? I'm so interested in what's going on here.
So it seems like you have a thread throughout about really trying to protect the environment and doing things that are environmentally friendly. I know that you had a series called Turbidity that was really about the environment, really specifically. It was teamed with a foundation. Maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Sure. So turbidity is the relative clarity of water. It can be measured. So I did a workshop on salt printing. I attended a workshop on salt printing. And salt printing is another historical photo process that uses water, salted water, I think a 5% solution, and silver nitrate. Yay, I thought of my word. So silver nitrate and salted water. You first add the salted water, then you add a layer, you let that dry completely, and then you add a layer of silver nitrate. And again, on watercolor paper, you let it dry. After it's dried, it is UV light sensitive. So in kind of figuring out and thinking about it, I realized I could make my own salt solution. I could get salt, make the solution at a percentage based on measuring the salt added to the amount of water. So what I did was I took water samples from around Charlotte and around North Carolina, and I had them in mason jars. It was like the weirdest, like I've got these mason jars labeled in my kitchen, like, oh, don't open that. Don't cook around that. Like, what are these jars? I mean, is there like a pig's foot floating in there? We don't know. No.
Did some of them look some variation, I suppose, of clarity? Huh?
Yeah. So what happened was when I added this dirty water to my process in the salt water process, the prints became a variety of shades and had some of them look streaky. Some of them have just a variety of colors. Also, my subject matter for this was I took these water samples and I photographed them under a microscope. And I don't have a microscope. We have a children's museum here called the Nature Center. It's been in Charlotte, over 50 years, maybe even 65 years. So they have what's called a wide view microscope. It's, instead of having two eyepieces that you look through, it has one large, probably 4-inch diameter piece of glass, and you look through that, and it helps children to see what's going on. They have a variety of samples you can look at. So I went to the museum with my own water samples, put them under the microscope, and I was able to use my camera directly against the glass to create these images. It was really interesting to see things in the water. And I think the salt water that I got from a North Carolina beach was the only thing that actually had something moving in it. So when I looked into the microscope, there is literally something going across my field of vision. And that was it was almost spooky, like, oh, okay, there's something living in that water. Yeah. And I don't have it in front of me now, but I would have to get the measure of what the microscope's perception was. I would love to take this project to another level. And I've been thinking about it quite a bit because of all of the talk of microplastics in water. I think it would be incredible to revisit this series and look at the microplastics. So I would have to figure out what kind of microscope that would be, how I can accurately photograph these images. So something a place to jump off. And I always am excited by things that get my brain going. It's like the pseudoscientist in me.
So I know you printed some as color, and some are in kind of a brown, and maybe explain what that is.
So the brown is the salt prints.
Oh, okay.
They're very low contrast. They're very, you can see the differences when you look at them side by side. I ended up printing them in color too, just because they were so interesting visually, just being color photographs. It really lets you see the details that are in the water, as opposed to the salt prints kind of allow you to see the differences that translate from the process.
Well, what I found interesting is, given they were through the microscope and with the color variety, it almost looked like looking down from the, outer space down to the earth.
Yes, there's actually an artist, I'll have to remember his name, but he made a book, things that look like the moon. And I often think about that when I look at these, because it's a round shape. It does kind of feel like moon or outer space kind of feel to it. And I also think that's very interesting. I've often thought about how nature mimics nature. So, I have these images of water that, they look kind of like the moon, some of them. So, it's just another example of nature mimicking nature.
Yeah. So maybe we could turn a bit to talk about, how has your art helped you from a healing perspective? Because art, especially that May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and
Sure.
Art can be super healing. Could you talk a bit about how art has been helpful?
Sure. So I'll kind of go in chronological order. When I first started experiencing major depression, I was working as a freelance photographer. I was doing journalistic work for magazines, and basically any job that I could get my hands on photo wise. What this allowed me was the time and space to be able to not necessarily deal, but do what I was doing in my major depression, which was sleeping a lot. So I was able to kind of mask and still contribute to the world based on a very loose schedule. And that honestly was something that helped me a lot. If I had a job that was 9 to 5, I would have lost that job. There's no way I could have maintained a job like that. So photography allowed me to, go through this really hard time and still be able to show up sporadically to I didn't have a normal schedule, and it was still part-time, and, when I was doing it. So it allowed me to, I guess, go through what I was going through without disturbing too much of my outside world. I suppose that's a way to say it. When I found cyanotype, I came out of that major depression. I still have anxiety. I still have depression. I still have ADD. But I'm able to cope a lot better based on, the therapy that I had gone through. I had a child. She is now 7. That was a major turning point as well, because it wasn't just me anymore. I had to provide for someone else. I was a single mom when I gave birth. So when I found the cyanotype, it again allowed me to be the artist that I wanted to be. It allowed me to move cathartically in the process of making. And, if I'm having a rough time, if I can manage to get my supplies, I always have chemistry. So it's like one of those things that, like, I always have my cyanotype chemistry, and it's ready to roll anytime I am. So if I can get myself in a place, if I'm having a hard time, I can get myself in a place to just make anything, make it. Then it always helps me. It always helps me to come out of my shell a little bit. It always helps me to feel better, like I've been productive, because as we know, if you get into some of these downtimes, you have to be careful about beating yourself up. You're like, I haven't done anything today. I really want to do something. So I can go out there, make a mess with cyanotype, and I have done something and I feel good about that.
Well, it sounds like not only was it healing, it just really brought about the idea of creation, which, uh, uh, gives self-worth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely tied to my self-worth. Because and it just helps it, if I make something, then I can say, girl, you've made something today. So it's not like, oh, you've literally done nothing. And some days are like that. I've literally done nothing. But if I can manage to make something, it just brightens my day for sure.
Yeah. And I guess, let me ask you this. What would you tell your younger self now, given what you've learned by going through the major depression and really discovering this ability to create? What would you tell your younger self?
I would say, don't beat yourself up. Try to do something, even if it's small. Don't beat yourself up. This, depression doesn't define who you are. You're still Mert Jones outside of what you are feeling and what is happening. You are still, a person who is a very valid part of society. And I think in my, as I've come to 45 years of age, I realize that, it's not, I don't have to go out there and pretend to be normal. I can go out there and say, you know what? I have these disabilities and it's part of who I am, and it makes up the fabric of our entire society. And that's okay. I think for a really long time, I just had to pretend to be normal. This, what I was dealing with, what I was going through wasn't normal. So it wasn't valid. It wasn't allowed. And I appreciate the shift. And it's a long process, and I will certainly try my best to do my part in awareness for other people. I think I think about, quote unquote, what a normal person's day would look like. Would they be chipper in the morning? Let's go, go, go. And I have to say, it's okay for me to be different. It's okay for me to have a difficult day. It's okay for me to pick up the next day if I had a hard day the day before. It's still valid. It's still part of our social fabric. And it doesn't take away from, my self-worth or who I am as a person or an artist.
Something that I've really thought about, especially with the, new statistics saying, 1 in 8 in the world have mental or emotional health challenges. 1 in 4 in the US is, what is normal?
Right.
What is normal? I think that's the stigma part, is there's still this feeling that you can't talk about it. You can't be yourself. You can't. And that's one of the parts of the layered onion that's really important, is to tackle that stigma, because everybody is touched.
Yeah.
Whether it's you personally, family members, colleagues. I mean, everybody is touched. It's such a shame that there's still a stigma even today.
It is, just like if I require more vitamin D than the person sitting beside me, it's a very similar, I require different things to get to words to live my life. I require more vitamin D. I feel like if we looked at it less of a disability, more of just a different way of being, that could help. Like, I think sometimes people get scared, or in some of my past experiences, people are like, oh, you are depressed and anxious. I mean, you have anxiety and depression. Wow, that seems really scary for me. And I just don't want any part in it. And it's like, no, it's just I'm different. It's okay to be different. It's valid and reasonable. And um, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. Mine just happen to have more of a label sometimes.
Yeah. And, the fabric of society is richer if we can let everybody's thread be the thread they need to be.
Yeah.
And I think that there's just such pressure to conform versus, be who you are. And I do think that's one thing that happens over time as I shouldn't say obviously, but most of us get some clarity of self, and in clarity of self, we're probably in a better place to allow that to be seen.
Sure.
Yeah. So I do want to ask you, maybe you want to share anything that's new and exciting. I know you recently got married. Congratulations on that. But
Thank you so
are
much.
there any new projects or anything that you're working on you want to share?
Sure. I was actually just part of a show. It's closing May 4th on Thursday. It is called Unbound, and the show is curated by an artist here called Meredith Connolly. She's an amazing visual artist, and she did a wonderful job on the show. And it's all survivors of domestic violence and sexual abuse or sexual assault. And it was interesting in a I live in a place that has more than 1 million people in Charlotte and the surrounding areas, and to come together with other artists that are my colleagues out in the world, and to build this bridge. I had no idea that that person had any experience in these areas, and it's a really uplifting show. My pieces are actually my 3 children. It's hard to describe, but they're very dark images. They're black and white. The children are not smiling. There's an individual picture of each one. One is called She Is Loved, one is called She Is Worthy, and one is called She Is Safe. And it came to be that was those parts. I was making a visual representation of like my inner child and what I have learned through my therapy, and that I am safe, that I am worthy, that I am loved, because those are not easy to I guess teach oneself at a point. So it was a very moving show to be a part of, and I'm so glad that I took the opportunity and to share yet another part of myself that I have kept quiet for so long. So
That sounds lovely.
I was really, really proud of the work I did for that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So what drew you to the Layered Onion community?
I saw it on Instagram and I looked into it, and I read the mission statement and looked at other artists' profiles and thought, wow, these people are very brave because I've never really openly talked about my mental health experiences. And I realize how important it is. And it feels like, again, like the show Unbound, it's like when you do it together, it has like a certain validity or a certain it makes you feel more safe to do it, like safety in numbers almost. So, I saw these people on the website and these artists showing their work, talking about their story, and it just made me feel really connected, and I wanted to be a part of it.
Well, we're excited you are a part of it. Your work is very exciting, and I I love the complexities. So that's super cool. My final question is there any last words of wisdom that you would want to share with artists that have faced similar challenges?
Sure. I think finding a way to connect with artists that are similar to you is a wonderful way to feel like you're not alone, to feel like you're connected to the community. So that would be one thing. Choose a mentor. I never really reached out to anyone to be a mentor to me. And I realize now, well, all I had to do was ask. So that I think is another important thing that a young artist could do. Find someone who's willing to mentor you.
Well, that's a great piece of advice about a mentor, because I think often you're afraid someone's going to say no.
And that's like the worst thing anybody could say. I mean, that's just, you miss 100% of the chances you don't take, right?
Right, for sure. So, well, thank you for spending time with us today. I'm really excited about your pieces, and I would hope people would look at the shallot. Your piece is lovely, as well as a lot of the art that's in there. And I wish you well on your future endeavors.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be a part of the Layered Onion. I'm glad to be a part of the shallot. This is my first time. So thank you for this community. Thank you for these opportunities. It's really great.
Thank you for joining us today. It is an honor to talk with these amazing creators. You can see and read the artist's work in The Shallot, our journal of mental health, art, and literature, or on our website, thelayeredonion.com. Thank you.